This week on Bullshift, the podcast, we look into the role of Finfluencers, the people who influence the way you make decisions with your finances using social media. Pay attention. Welcome to Bullshift, the podcast. This is the podcast that talks about how the financial services industry shifts your attention to make you feel more bullish. My name is John DeGoey. I'm the host of the podcast and the author of the book, Bullshift. My guest this week is Ryan Munson. Ryan is the research manager for the CFA Institute, that's the Chartered Financial Analysts Institute, and his work focuses on the future of finance and explores how extra financial factors impact the investment industry, and that's with regard to both the people who are doing the investing and the people who are giving them advice. He's the author of several research reports from the CFA Institute, and he holds an MBA and an MS in business analytics from the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University. Ryan, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I'm wondering if you can begin by telling us a bit about your work and the research that you do at the CFA Institute.
Sure. So I really look at kind of what are the factors that investment professionals need to understand that are happening in the world around them that can help them make more informed decisions about their career and about their investments. And so my research really focuses on kind of macroeconomics, trying to understand connections between the investment industry, non-investment industry, and then different individual characteristics of investor demographics. So looking at retail investors, how they differ from institutional investors, younger investors differ from older investors, regional breakdowns, and so on and so forth.
So I had to look this up. I had never heard of the term extra financial factors and how they can affect your risk profile. So could you perhaps go into a little more detail and explain what those are and how they affect us and why they're important?
So I think in finance, we often refer to them as externalities. So they're things that are happening outside of the world of finance and the world of business that are going to have a material impact on a particular outcome. And so we can think of them in two different ways. We can think of them for the investment professional or how they're conducting their business, making their investment decisions. But the way that I think about them and the way that I try to focus my research on educating investment professionals is, what do these things mean to the profession? What do these things mean to your career? So if we take an example like AI disruption or something like that, how can AI, which is happening everywhere at all times to all people, specifically impact the investment management professional's workflow? What does it mean for their personal development as they continue through their career? And how can they apply these general broad-based applications within their own industry and bringing their own perspective?
Externalities, as you know, can be both positive and negative, and I know you know that, but it's the sort of thing that a lot of people listening might not think about. So an externality can be anything that has an unintended or an unexpected consequence impact on the way things play out. So there can be a negative externality when you've got a firm that's polluting into a river and that's actually hurting your health. Or you can have a positive externality when your neighbor does a home improvement on the house and as a result of that, the value of your home goes up. So there's a halo effect that comes with that sort of an externality. Do you think people in finance think about externalities and how they might have an impact on the decisions they make?
I mean, I think that that's a pretty tough question because it comes down to, a lot of the differentiation between strategies, between, portfolio construction is based on whether or not you include or exclude different potential externality impacts. And so I think that maybe as a whole, the industry is under considering these potential impacts. I do think that there are certainly reasons why that might be happening. So they might not think that within the given time horizon that they are investing for, the externality might have an impact. So in this case, the one thing that we always end up talking about is climate change. If you're looking at a short-term investment opportunity, perhaps the externality of climate change is not appropriately considered, given that that's something that most people think is going to happen over a longer period than the investment itself. And there are some certainly challenges that arise from that perspective. But I think that, as a whole, we think the industry appropriately values things given the information that they have.
It's ironic because I think you could say that externalities have an impact on prices even if you don't think about it. So as a for instance, there are a lot of people who believe in market efficiency, and if there are a lot of different people who think about how an externality would have an impact on price, their thinking about it could have an impact on price because their thinking will actually change what they're willing to buy or sell for. And as a result, even if you as an investor had given no consideration whatsoever to the externality, it could still be fairly priced because other people who are thinking about it are using what they think about to incorporate their views into the market price. And as a result, the market price goes up or down as a result of other people thinking about externalities, even if you never, ever thought about it.
I think that might be a bit of a dangerous way to think about it because it kind of reduces your individual connection to an appropriate valuation and your individual prioritization of what that externality is. So I think that could be a bit of I think that I agree with what you're saying, that if enough people have already made this decision at an individual level, that it should adjust the price accordingly of whatever that investment may be. But I think that if we all rely on the voice of someone else to make that valuation, then it can potentially have some negative outcomes for the efficiency of capital allocation.
Right. Well, let's look at individuals. People are. It's important that when you build portfolios, that you do them in a way that's consistent. That you have a risk probability, a risk tolerance, a risk capacity that's consistent with what you yourself can handle. Do you think ordinary investors and the people who give them advice, for that matter, do a good job of truly assessing how much risk people can even handle?
I think individual investors have some level of sophistication about their own individual risk. They understand their own personal budgets better than anyone else, perhaps. But I do think that there is a level of, I'm not sure what the best word for it is, but there's a level of naivete, if you will, for individual investors. And so I think that the key, at least in the research that I've done, the key differentiator from like an investor who is confident and one that isn't is they understand what their limits are, as far as the limits of their financial knowledge, let's say.
So that leads me to think about blind spots. If people aren't always doing a good job of getting a handle on their risk and what they can handle, their risk tolerance and their risk capacity, what could you do if you were an investor to get a better handle on what you can actually tolerate, and what can you do about learning more to make sure that you calibrate it properly in the first place?
Well, I think it comes down to using the network of those around you. So for most individual investors, a lot of my research focuses on younger investors. Younger investors aren't very likely to have a financial professional that they have in their Rolodex, and they probably don't even know what a Rolodex is. So when we think about younger investors, they're looking for information from the internet, from social media, from their family and friends. And so there's kind of two groups there. There's the internet side and family and friend side. And then actually third on that list of sources of information becomes financial professionals and financial firms. And so really, for young investors in particular and individual investors in general, understanding the value that each of those cohorts brings to your investment knowledge is pretty important to understanding kind of what your ultimate goal is for your investments. And so, driving down to, social media, there's abundance of information, but it's not necessarily personalized for your personal situation. Family and friends, they're great for your personal connection. They know you very well, but they might not have the most investment knowledge. And then there's the financial industries and financial professionals who are the intermediaries. So they are trying to get to know you better on a personal level so that they can apply their broad-based knowledge to your situation and help you figure out what is the best risk-return trade-off for you.
So I took a look at your paper about Finfluencers, and I think about this from time to time because it's the sort of thing that financial advisors are always struggling with. When you think about people who get their advice from TikTok and from X and from other means of social media, they're going to be skewed into thinking certain things and thinking in certain ways. And I'm wondering if you could offer your thoughts on the research and what you found and how it affects people in general, I suppose young investors in particular.
Sure. So I want to be as neutral as I can in that I don't think that there is necessarily a positive or negative spin to the role of social media in finance or the role that influencers play. There really is an unprecedented amount of information available on social media platforms, and I think that access to information will help educate the next generation of investors so that by the time they are in their mid-career or late career, they are more financially savvy than perhaps the people of today are. So I think that there is a role for this type of information dissemination. The challenges are, with this abundance of information comes an abundance of concern. And not everyone on these platforms is out there for the investor's best interest. They are often receiving financial kickbacks for their promotion of certain products. They are affiliated with different firms that might not necessarily be in the best interest of the individual. So when we think about, I don't want to name names, but there are some certain types of investments that might not necessarily be as well aligned with potential goals-based investing that are often presented on these platforms. And so there's just a really big concern for the bad actors that might be promoting these investments that aren't necessarily considered investments, and the fact that there is a lack of transparency and a huge amount of conflicts of interest that perpetuate these different platforms.
Well, you can think of blind spots, right? People don't know what they don't know. So as a result of that, we have a situation where people aren't even trying to protect themselves against things that they're unaware of. And as a result, they could go on blithely living their lives and doing their investing and perhaps taking on more risk than they otherwise think, and not even giving it a moment's consideration in terms of what they might be doing differently.
It's a great question, and I will say that I have some level of confidence in this because when so social media is the number one source of information for young investors in particular, but it also is the least trusted source of information. So there is a healthy level of skepticism from these investors, and I think that a lot of that comes from this next generation kind of being raised on social media. They know from the start that everything on the internet isn't true, and you're often only getting a glamorized version of someone's life and vacation on Instagram. You're not seeing the day-to-day that they're going through in their lives. So I think that there is a healthy level of skepticism there. But I think that the real way that we can help kind of highlight these potential challenges is through more formal financial literacy education. And we've seen that over the last few generations, so from Gen X to millennials to Gen Z, we've seen the percentage of people who have received formal financial education increase, which is awesome. But that is still, there's still room to go. So I think it's about a third of those in Canada and about 50% of those in the US that say they have not received formal financial education at any point in their education career. And so I think that in and of itself is a pretty big concern and something that we can easily address by continuing to support financial literacy, continuing to promote good actors on social media. If there are larger firms that are reputable that are putting out educational content that is meant to equip young investors and investors in general with general knowledge rather than knowledge of a specific investment product. That's something that we want to promote and we want to highlight as a good example of the use of this type of platform. And so, yeah, I think that there are opportunities that we can use where people are today. And I mean, this is a term that's thrown out all the time, but you have to meet them where they are. It's a terrible term, but it's something that that is always being said, and I think it's true. And so I think but we have to use it in a positive way. We need to really focus on accentuating the benefits that a mutually collaborative platform like social media has.
Let's look at the other end of the spectrum. For instance, let's say you've got someone who's 70 years old, retired, has $1 million portfolio, and that portfolio is a fairly standard, plain vanilla 60-40 portfolio, 60% in stocks, that's 600,000 in stocks, 40% in bonds, that's 400,000 in bonds. That person might say, oh, I think the risk profile that I have is entirely consistent with the 60-40 portfolio. And then let's say we have a situation where the stock market drops by half. Now the $600,000 in stocks is worth $300,000. The $400,000 in bonds is still worth $400,000, and the $1 million portfolio is down to $700,000. A lot of people will panic in that situation, even if they say they can handle it. The reality is a lot of people who say they can handle it, in spite of all the admonitions and all the advice and all the behavioral coaching, oftentimes can't handle it. But here's something that I learned during the crisis of 2007 to 2009, when the market dropped by about 50%. If you have $1 million portfolio and it's now worth only $700,000, Financial Planning 101 and Finance Portfolio Management 101 would say what you should do is you should take about $120,000 from your bonds to put it into stocks so that you have 70% 60% out of the 700,000, which is 420 in stocks instead of 300. And now instead of having the $400,000 in bonds, now you're down to 280,000. But what you're asking people to do is to actually buy low and sell high, and reallocate $120,000 of their bonds into stocks when stocks have dropped by half. And that is the sort of thing that I can tell you most people do not have the stomach for. In fact, in most people's cases, they actually want to sell even more. And a lot of what you have to do at that point is just get them to hold what they have. And now you have a portfolio of, it's actually less than 50-50. It's only 300,000 in stocks and 400,000 in bonds, which of course then says, well, if we can't rebalance the portfolio, maybe we should think about actually rewriting your risk profile and actually saying that instead of being a 60-40 investor, maybe you're really only a 50-50 investor. But we have to take into account that what's in your portfolio is consistent with what you say you can handle. And a lot of people do not want to think about that when they actually have to do so, because the market has maybe taught them a lesson about what they can and cannot actually tolerate.
I mean, it's something that we hear a lot, is that investors who are entering retirement or right around the retirement age are sitting on this lump sum, and they don't necessarily know how to manage it. They've spent their entire careers building up to this retirement nest egg, and now that it's time for drawdowns, they panic. And it's kind of hard to say, like, okay, now I need to start taking this money in and start living off of this investment that I've spent my life creating. And so I think that there's a lot of behavioral impact on that when you start talking about outflows and potentially like holding on to investments that aren't performing very well because you're scared. And I think that is that's a valid behavioral response. To offset that, I think that there are, that's really where the financial professional comes into play. You need somebody sitting there, and we joke sometimes that AI, the challenge with like AI investing is there's not a neck to wring and things go wrong. And that's kind of the role that the financial professional plays in those scenarios. They're almost a financial therapist to say, you're making this decision based on the math that we know today, and we suggest that you hold the line, but that isn't always an easy thing for them to do.
Thanks so much. That's great, Ryan. So let's see if we can end off the way we always end off. The first thing that I always ask people about is that's bullshit. If it's up to you, what would you point out that you could change in the financial services industry in 2024?
I think so going back to kind of the role of Finfluencers, and because this is something that I've most recently been researching, it's a little bit frustrating how many financial industry firms are using Finfluencers in a potentially reckless way. Because there are so many Finfluencers who are being sponsored by firms, but they're promoting a particular product that happens to be of the firm's creation, or they are not requiring disclosures from Finfluencers that there is a relationship. So I think that to me is certainly frustrating. And as I was mentioning before, I think there really is an opportunity for social media to enhance the knowledge level of investors. And so to see firms that are particularly potentially engaging in nefarious actions on these platforms is something that is pretty frustrating. And I think that there's an opportunity for us to do better.
Okay. And now that you've gone through what you dislike, the second thing that I like to ask people about is something I call shift happens. If it was up to you, Ryan, what would you change and how would you change it specifically? What would you actually do to address the problem that you just identified a moment ago?
So I think I will caveat this, but there are certainly challenges to my response. But as a blanket statement, I think that the regulation around social media needs to be better. So the platform regulation itself. So if we think about the individual social media platforms, they have a responsibility to ensure the validity of their content. And that's something that I don't think, we've seen it happen with like political elections. There's these little disclaimers and stuff like that now, but it hasn't happened with financial information. And so I think that is part of the opportunity. And then secondly, government regulators need to do a little bit of a better job of saying like, this is nefarious advertising, whether it's captured under the SEC marketing rule or whatever it is. But we have to understand that we can't just let these influencers run amok and potentially taint something that is a really great opportunity for us to engage a younger audience.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. I want to wish you all the best in the future, and I want to thank you again for being my guest this week.
Thanks for having me.
John DeGooey is a portfolio manager with Design Securities in Toronto. He is the author of both Bullshift, How Optimism Bias Threatens Your Finances, and Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry, Protecting Yourself from Well-Intended but Oblivious Advisors. The books are available online and in bookstores everywhere. The opinions expressed on Bullshift and Shift Happens should not be construed as investment advice. You can reach John at jdegooey@designsecurities.ca or at 647-STAND-UP. That's 647-782-6387.